It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Italy. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and we continue Series 25 on the groups and players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Italy's players. It's actually part 2 of the player media cast, and here we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. There is a link to that in the show notes. This episode will be divided into 2 sections. In section 1, we look over the list we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. And in section 2, we summarize surprises in the selections and review injuries. We did have a section 3, and we did it for the teams in Group A and for Spain in this group. We revisited the predictions of starters in light of the warm-up games in section 3, but time prevents us from doing that, so we had to cut that section. Let's begin then on a little initial information just on the squad selection. So Spain began with a 30-man preliminary roster, first published on May 23rd. Changes were made to the preliminary squad between May 30th and June 3rd. What happened there is 2 central defenders had to leave the team injured, and 1 more was brought in. Then the squad was reduced to 26 players on June 6th. So we began with 30 players. So we had 1 added, and then 5 of them were cut for the preliminary squad. So we're going to see 5 players here in blue highlight that were selected for the preliminary squad but didn't make the final squad. Let's jump into section 1 and we'll begin with the manager. We'll consider him selected because he wasn't let go before the tournament here. So Luciano Spalletti leading them through the tournament here. Let's look at our goalkeepers, and we begin with a definite candidate in Gianluigi Donnarumma, the captain of the team, and he was selected. Our likely candidate, Guglielmo Vicario, also selected for the squad. We had 2 possible candidates here. The first was Alex Merritt, and he was selected. However, the second, Ivan Providel, was not selected. He made the preliminary squad, but not the final cut there. Okay, and we won't talk about possible but unlikely or players who seem to be off the squad unless they are actually selected and part of the narrative. Let's go on to defenders and central defense. And this kind of spells out what's a bit of a problem for Italy in that there are 6 possible candidates, make that 7 possible candidates here, and some others besides. And it kind of goes to show that things were very undecided. So it made part 1 of our podcast quite long, going through all of these possible candidates and sometimes not identifying any likely starters. I kind of wish we could have done the section where we revisited the starting squad, but I'm guessing that would have been quite complex. Anyway, here's what we have. I said 2 of them actually left the squad injured. The first was Francesco Acerbi. So kind of withdrew himself due to injury. And I might as well go to our 4th candidate, Giorgio Scalvini, because he's the same situation. So those 2 players withdrew from the preliminary squad. And I'm just going to add the player who was brought. No, he was one of our candidates here. So I'll talk about him when we get to him. Okay, so next we have Alessandro Bastoni. He was the second of our possible candidates, and he was selected. And Gianluca Mancini also selected. The two other possible candidates were Alessandro Buongiorno. Oh my God, I'm all over the place here. Alessandro Buongiorno was selected for the final squad. Federico Gatti was not selected, but once those two players, Acerbi and Scalvani, was left the team injured, he was brought back in to the preliminary squad and ultimately chosen for the final squad. So Federico Gatti making it, though in a bit of an unconventional way. Our final possible candidate, veteran Leonardo Bonucci, not selected for the final squad. On we go to the left backs, and we had a definite candidate in Federico Di Marco. He was selected. And we had three possible candidates here. Destiny Udogi was not selected. Injury may have played a role in that. We'll review injuries later on. The second possible candidate, Andrea Cambiaso, was selected for the squad, but the third one, Cristiano Biraghi, not selected there. On we go to the right backs. Giovanni Di Lorenzo was a likely candidate, the first of two, and he was selected for the squad. And so was the other likely candidate, Matteo Darmian. Both of those selected. Okay, let's move upfield to defensive midfielders. We begin with the likely candidate, Jorginho, who was selected. He was the only defensive midfielder there. So for central midfielders, we had a definite candidate in Brian Cristante. And those are the only candidates we had in those positions. I think there was a candidate that we forgot to introduce in part one. That was the possible but unlikely Michael Folorunso. I don't see him on the list here, so we must have forgotten to put him there. And actual Manuel Locatelli was a possible candidate, and he was not selected. However, Michael Folorunso was. And since we didn't talk about him in part one, I'll just quickly introduce him here. He's 26 years old and plays for Napoli in Italy since 2019. He got his first appearance on the bench in March 2024, but didn't start either of the games, but was on the bench and then not selected for one other, the last match. So we thought, oh, okay, he was tried out and then pretty quickly dismissed. Maybe that recent participation should have put him in the possible category for us. Regardless, he is selected, Michael Folorunso. So a bit of a surprise there. Let's move on to right midfielders. And we have two definite candidates. The first is Nicolo Barella, and he was selected for the final squad. And so was the other definite candidate, David Pratisi. Both of those selected. We had a possible candidate in Raul Bellanova, and he was selected for the squad. That's it for right midfielders. And so we go over to the left side. And here we have only possible level candidates, Giacomo Bonaventure and Sandro Tonali, but neither of them were selected for the final squad. And that is it for that category. So we move on upfield to attacking midfielders. We begin with left attackers. And we had just possible candidates here. So again, kind of pointing to the indecision over the last year and a half. Federico Chiesa just a possible candidate, but he was selected. In fact, all three of our possible candidates were, all four of them, I should say, Lorenzo Pellegrini, Mattia Zaccagni, or Zaccagni, and Stefan El Sharawi. All four of them selected for the final squad. So we await to see which of those will actually be starters. Meanwhile, we move over to the right attacking midfield, which is not that much different. We do have one likely candidate here, but also four possible ones. And none of them made it. Holy smokes. I didn't realize it was quite that bad. So Nicolo Zanioli, an injury played a role, and we had known about that injury in part one. Our first possible candidate, Domenico Berardi, injury also playing a role. We'll review that later. But the other three were just not selected. So Matteo Politano, Wilfred Gnonto, and Riccardo Orsolini at least made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. So a bit of a dearth of right attackers. I suppose the four possible players on the left side that were selected will now appear in the right attacking role. On to central attackers. We don't have any viable candidates, or we didn't and still don't. So we move directly to forwards. And here we have a definite candidate in Giacomo Raspadori, who was selected, and likely candidate Matteo Retegui, also selected. Three possible candidates here too. The first of which, Ciro Immobile, not selected for the squad. The second one, though, was Gianluca Scamacca. He was the only one selected because Moise Keane, the third possible candidate, was not selected. All right, that's it. Those are your 26 players. Oops, we had a couple of players to add on, but we'll do that in the next section, section 2. And we'll talk about them there. Okay, let's review the surprises. So any notable non-selections and any new additions to the squad. So really not that many surprises, partly because so many candidates were at the possible level that we really didn't know who they were kind of favoring. But one player who didn't make it through was the 37-year-old veteran central defender, Leonardo Bonucci. Again, not really a surprise. He was only at the possible level, but because he's such a veteran, we're putting him as a notable non-selection. For surprise inclusions, really only Michael Foloruncho, who came in just in March, basically was selected for one game and not the second game, so we had considered him unlikely, but actually was selected. And we look at some new players here too. We have a central defender, Riccardo Calafiori, who was selected for the squad. So we'll give a little info on him. He is 22 years old, and he got his 2 caps in 2024 in June. So in the 2 warm-up games there, he started one of them and subbed in for the other. Calafiori plays for Bologna in Italy and was with Basel in Switzerland for a short time, having moved there from Roma in Italy, his first club. I'll introduce the central midfielder next, Nicolo Fagioli, who did make the squad as well. He's 23 years old and has been with the team for quite a bit longer, actually, since 2022. I'm surprised he didn't show up on our radar for part 1, but the reason is that he didn't play any games in 2023. So we have to go back to November 2022 for his first game. And then he was off the squad for various reasons, including a suspension. But he did appear in the June games there. I see he has 3 caps. I think 2 of them were in 2022 and 1 of them in the warm-up games. I'm not dead sure about that. But anyway, Nicolo Fagioli is part of the squad. The other candidate added was Samuel Ricci. And we won't give a bio on him because he didn't make the final cut. So one of the preliminary squad players not selected. Update on injuries. We have a couple of players who were dropped, actually several, including those central defenders who seemed to join the team and then withdrew because of injury, whether they picked it up there or whether they had the injury coming in. Anyway, dropped due to injury and not selected for the squad was Nicolo Zaniolo, and he was out with what was called a bone splintering. That sounds awful. He was out since late May. He missed the last game of the season and was on an unknown return date. And it seems that injury was the reason, because we had him as a likely candidate based on his participation. The next one, we'll just say he was cut from the preliminary squad due to injury. Francesco Acerbi. We don't know the nature of the injury, just the fact that he withdrew from the preliminary squad. The same is actually true of Giorgio Scalvani, who we didn't get details on the injury, but withdrew from the preliminary squad. And then we had a few players who we knew to be out with injury. Actually, we weren't so sure about Destiny Udogi, and we don't know what his likelihood was because I think he had made a bigger impression towards the end of the season, so maybe had gone up in the manager's estimation. We only had him as a likely candidate based on his participation, but keeping in mind that that was only until March, so there was time for players to come into form. Anyway, Udogi was out with a hamstring injury since late April, kind of undermining everything I just said, and with an unknown return date. So whether he would have been selected or not is unclear, just a possible candidate, but the injury certainly made the decision for him. We could say the same of Leonardo Spinazzola, out with a hamstring injury since mid-May, missed the last 2 games of the season. He was expected back on May 29th, is still on the injury list there, so we don't think he recovered. But anyway, Spinazzola was a possible but unlikely candidate anyway, so the injury may or may not have influenced it. He might not have been selected anyway. And the same is true to a lesser extent, though, of Domenico Berardi. Achilles tendon surgery for him, and was not expected back until next October. So even in the part 1 of the mediacast, we knew that he would not be selected, but only a possible candidate based on his participation record anyway. Okay, well, I wish we could do the look at starters here because it's very up in the air for Italy. I suppose we'll now have to look at the first game of the tournament and see which among the many possible players, the players coded as possible, will actually turn up on the field. Anyway, I hope our look at Italy helps you to familiarize yourself with the players and helps you to enjoy watching Italy in the cup. We would like to thank Mike Tripak, Make Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this mediacast.